Thanks, Howe. It's Palm Sunday. We've got a lot of things going on today. We're running a little behind, so we'll go ahead and get started. Very pleased to introduce a man who really needs no introduction, for many of you at least, Professor Jack Roper, who is a loyal member of this parish and a historian. And he is going to talk to us this morning about the history of this parish, this very distinct place in the life of the Episcopal Church and this community. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, sir.
Picking up the prayer book that we used when I went through what y'all are going through, which you did with Bishop Rosenberg in 2014, I noticed that we have Bishop Rosenberg asked, "Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being?" And we respond,
We will, with God's help.
Justice, peace, dignity. I was sponsored for this renewal of baptism by Doc Bonds, and Father Will asked if I had handouts. I said no, because I want everything back, but I've got stuff to pass around. This is not actually mine. I have to return it someday, but I get to look at it each day until I have to return it. This is Doc Bonds, Justice, Peace, Dignity, who brought me into this church. And when the bishop was asking me those questions, the way we did it that year, she stood behind me and put her strong right hand on my shoulder and squeezed it pretty hard, like maybe I might run away or something. Justice, peace, dignity, magnanimitatem megalosukos. She's 35 or so here in this picture, and had survived frightful beatings by her husband, who was thought to be important. Well, he was important, but a good man, and wasn't. And he beat the kids, and finally she gave up and brought the kids back over here to the Parkersville area where she had grown up, and raised them and got them all through college. She herself was able to get through college despite considerable difficulties. And I'll pass her picture around. We buried her not terribly long ago. In looking at she told me quite a great deal about the church, and of course others, our griot, Roddy Brown, has told me about the church, and then others have helped me look up things about the church. And I will warn us to talk that, of course, I got to talk about slavery. I know people don't want you doing that at school, but I've been doing that for 48 years, and it's sort of a deal in our part of the world. I also have to say that I can't tell you all about slavery everywhere. I can only tell you about Litchfield Plantation and the people who were there, who then came here. I'll also note a couple things. When we do our acolytes, John Sands actually prepares a list for the year, and then my job is to get the weekly list over to Susan so it can be printed in the bulletin. And it's a simple job to do. As our priest reminded me, it's not so much guilt as responsibility if it comes out wrong. So if the person in the acolyte position isn't the one listed in the bulletin, that is my responsibility. I also remember something an acolyte told me. She said that when she was little, she could not be an acolyte because girls didn't do that. And then when she got big, they realized she was gay and wasn't supposed to be in church in any noisy way. And so, of course, in our church, all are supposed to be included. And now she can be on the list like everybody else. I will be talking about exclusion. I'll be talking about long periods when the bishop is in charge, but no specific priest. And that leads to another thing, that there will be a great reliance on the bishop, and who most of the time was more liberal than the other priests and the lay people. And since you are dealing with around 97% or 98% black people and a few white people, when the bishop then turns right in and begins going a different way, that's a greater crisis than just anywhere else. Another thing that happens, as I found in doing my research, is that a lot of things are taken away. I mean, physical things are taken away. I mean, fine furniture, the service, the silver service that you use in communion are taken away by white people who believe that Negroes didn't need such things, even though that was their church and they were using such things. Ms. Doc was originally a Brown, and the Browns really are this church. Did everyone get to see? Okay. The Browns really are this church. My father used to do genealogy. He did it with Bibles, and they were all over the house. There were charts like this. One of the interesting things that makes Litchfield different from other plantations is this is a partial genealogy started by Roddy Brown. It's got another 3 generations. It looks like something white people would do, an ability to follow back 6 or 7 generations. This is hard to do for other people in other plantations, but done routinely at Litchfield and then at our church here. Roddy also gave me a list of names of families who were at Litchfield and then here in communities, Georgiaville, Annieville, Parkersville, as they built no fewer than 4 buildings, all of which went down to worship. Taylors, Duncans, Deers, which is like Deer, Sally, D-E-A-R, Riley, Judges, Smalls, and Forbes were all other people who came from the same plantation. We of Holy Cross Faith Memorial Episcopal Church stand on the shoulders of others. These others were selected by God. They reverenced the Bible. They honored the practice of Anglican Episcopal forms of worship. And they used to the best of their considerable abilities divinely given reason. Fittingly, they and we go back to a man in 1843 on the Litchfield plantation, appropriately named Abram. He had a wife. We have yet to find out her name. We wish it was Sarah, but and maybe there was a Hagar, but we haven't got all that worked out yet. We can get, thanks to Roddy, we can get back to his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Abram came, he told his Brown kin, he came from Ghana in 1843, and Litchfield at the time was owned by John Pine Tucker. He owned several plantations. After a couple of years, the plantation was given to his son, Dr. Henry Massenberg Tucker. And that will raise still another thing. Dr. Tucker actually was a medical doctor, and the medical care was better there than on other plantations, and that became an expectation for the Brown family. Somebody ought to be out there making sure that there's medical care. So we have a Smith Medical Clinic. It didn't start last Tuesday. Bishop Frederick T. Davis who emerges as something of a hero in my studies, and Father Alexander Glennie baptized Abram and baptized his children, and I think married him, and whoever his wife was, but can't find those records. As you'll hear me often say, can't find that yet. But I have lots of help from lots of people, and we're gonna find it. The Litchfield plantation and Father Glennie, who's from England, were different also in that there was an effort to baptize each born baby with a name and a proper Christian service. Also, there was an effort, largely successful, to marry people. This sounds so basic, but in the rest of the state, there was no legal recognition of marriages between slaves. And usually baptism might have happened in the woods by black people slipping away to do that. But here it was all done. Here it was all done in the All Saints chapel that I attended in another era, and long ago there, another century. And we have some interesting pictures. That's right. We have some interesting pictures of black people all dressed up in front of All Saints Chapel. And then, of course, we'll know there'll come a time when they can't go to that chapel, which I'll cover in a moment, as there would come a time when I couldn't go to it either. The interesting thing is that you're also not supposed to read. Not supposed to read. However, slaves at Litchfield often figured out how to read. And we had heard in this class about the 1789 version of the Book of Common Prayer. And that book, which is, I think Father Will showed us a copy and let us touch it. It's tiny. It's in double columns and blessedly hard to read. That was available sometimes to Abram and his children on the plantation. Also, they memorized great parts of it. This came home to me just the other day, Thursday. There's a play, a Beckett play, Artist's Nightmare, and it's about a Shakespearean actor who ends up stuck in the middle of a play that he doesn't know the script and doesn't know what's going on. And like all of Beckett, it's you laugh and you laugh and you laugh and then later you cry. I had a young scholar whose job was to portray a woman, and he's a man, and he's a black man portraying a white woman, and his folks were embarrassed beyond speaking that he was doing this in public. And he said that it's hard to do all that if there's somebody out in the audience that will smile at you. So my simple role, was to go and smile at him while he did that. It's a brilliant play. He and two other men pretending to be women are talking at the same time. First you can't understand anything. Then they take turns and they have these long soliloquies that you can understand. And then they go back, and finally, when they do it all together, you get it. And it's again funny and sad. I talked to him later, and said, I've never understood how actors remember their lines. And he said, well, it's Shakespearean. It's Jacobean. It has a music and a rhythm. And you get into the music and the rhythm, and you never forget it. And it suddenly hit me, that's how they could remember the 1789 Book of Common Prayer. It is Jacobean. Everything is written in the same language with the same rhythms that Thomas Cranmer picked up, that William Shakespeare made famous. O Lord, our Heavenly Father, by whose almighty power we have been preserved this day, by their great mercy, defend us from perils and dangers, for the love of thy only Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. And we have Bishop Davis making a point of having Father Glennie come around and preach and baptize and marry. And, you know, he is the sacerdote doing what was doing the 7 sacraments. There's 47 plantations, and Bishop Glennie tried hard to get to all of them. And he couldn't do that every... Do you think you have it tough, Father Will? Yeah, he couldn't do that every Sunday, which meant something else about the people who started this place. They had to go long periods of time without a priest in charge. They had to do the service themselves, sometimes with the little 1789 book, other times they remembered it, the music of the Jacobean language. We, quite recently, I use we almost imperialistically, but all of us here were honored when some slaves who had been buried properly by Father Glennie, their bodies were found at a development. We know who the developer is, but we don't say his name because we're not supposed to. And after a certain period of time, was it Father Will, was it 8 years?
16.
See, 16 years. I've learned with Episcopalians, you'll always understate whatever is going on. But 16 years, nothing was done, and then finally they called Father Will and asked, could we reinter these bodies because they're, you know, it's a development going on, we got to put up a house, and bodies are in the way, but probably we shouldn't just pitch them into the river. And so people from the archaeology lab at the University of South Carolina became involved, many people became involved, and a marvelous service was conducted right across the street over where other former enslaved people were buried. They were buried probably with these words, Almighty God, with whom live the spirit of those who depart hence in the Lord, and with whom the souls of the faithful, after they are delivered from the burden of the flesh, are in joy and felicity. We give thee hearty thanks for the good example of these thy servants, who, having finished their course in faith, do now rest from their labors. And we beseech thee that we, with all those who are departed in the faith of thy holy name, may have our perfect consummation and bliss, both in body and soul, in thy eternal and everlasting glory through Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
Of the wonderful things Father Will has done, boy, that rates right up there. That I'll always remember you and love you for.
I have good friends. That's
You
really
do.
that's all it is.
And in low places, where it's good.
Well, we're in high places, but they're good friends. They're good friends. I want to thank Ryan for, I think you read that same very prayer that day. Yeah. For the second time.
And we thank Thomas Crown.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
You have people then in slavery. One other thing that makes Litchfield different, as Charles Joyner has shown us and George Rogers has shown us, the families were not broken up and dispersed. They were at other plantations, but that's one reason they can trace everything back. The families were kept together. On Litchfield, I'm not talking about all slavery. Okay, they were kept together, and they could worship together as family and go through the sacraments together. One thing Father Will has pointed out often, and I find it to be the case, school, of course we're standing in a school, and church, and we're standing in a church, the same thing, especially for the people who created Holy Cross Faith Memorial. School and church, really the same thing. Whenever I bring kids to visit the church, they'll say they enjoyed it, but it sure was like going to school. And the priest seemed like a professor. And it wasn't like yeah. But that's the way it always was from 1843 onward. From 1843 onward. If Father Glennie couldn't come around, which was probably 3 out of every 4 months, then Abram and others who had either figured out how to read or, like my student, had memorized everything, would lead everyone in a service. There were efforts at medical care, at schooling, worship according to our Book of Common Prayer, and then the sacraments were provided. The sacraments were provided. The American Civil War came, and with it came freedom. In my own family, we had always talked about Civil War Reconstruction as a period of great tragedy. We lost everything. But some of what we lost was human beings that we had no business owning anyway. And as I've done research and hadn't completed it either, I know I'm related to people that we owned as slaves. They're my brothers, not in a spiritual sense, but in a biological sense. And any redneck who's been around any while, looking closely, will make that discovery. You're part black, we're part black. We may, as a kid told me the other day, maybe we're all the same color and don't know it. With the ending of the Civil War, William T. Sherman showed up, and you hear about 40 acres and a mule. Briefly, Mr. Lincoln had a military command that all this land that was intestate, no one left any kind of record as who was to get it. The white people ran away, and leaving about 5,000 black people here. And Mr. Sherman, who whatever else followed orders, was told, get the land to them, let them start working it. Let them start working it. The army that you are, you can take from whatever they produce, which would not be rice now, but cotton and other crops, that you can take a part of it to cover the Army's expense. But try not to take more than the Army actually spent on the early form of what we would call sharecropping. There was hope. There was hope for Watson Brown and his wife Louise. There was hope that they would actually have their own little farm that they would own, and Mr. Sherman would get them a mule. This may have happened briefly, but before terribly long, the lady who used to own the plantation where Watson Brown was, not now Litchfield, Ms. Weston, Emily, who did the beautiful sketches of what the plantations looked like. She got so deeply into debt, to settle the debt, she had to write a personal note, banking personal note, to Mr. Mazik, and then that meant he owned all the land. And he stayed with lawyers for about 5 years, and it was over. No black people had any farmland at all. No black people had any farmland at all. And they were working as sharecroppers, not for the United States Army, but for white people in the area. Another issue would be where we're going to worship. Where we're going to worship. The All Saints Chapel was opened up in the spring of 1866 after being closed for a while. And Bishop Davis came, and Father Glennie had been in a sort of retreat during a great deal of the fighting of the war. He came, and a number of freed people came, and two asked to be confirmed and several asked for their babies to be baptized, as will happen here at 10:30.
Yes.
And Father Glennie and Bishop Davis confirm people and baptize people. One thing noted by all students who've helped me in any research is that this isn't really like a black church. It doesn't sound like a black church. I mean, it's, you know, the language is Shakespearean, and everybody's different and formal. And I told them, well, that is the Litchfield people who were at this particular chapel, which was not exactly here. There were 4 chapels. They were, several of them were built by Renty Tucker and Thomas Bonneau. Charles Dorner, in his magnificent study down by the riverside, starts things with Renty Tucker, slave, who had great skill as a builder and built things that you can go see, historic buildings over on Polly's Island that are well marked. He also built Holy Cross, a slave chapel for the slaves on land owned by Emily Weston. And I was going to try to get through this without saying the wrong thing, but I was baptized by Father Hopkins Weston, a direct descendant of Emily. And we both talked often about how our families became Episcopal rather than Catholic, and we traced it to 1530 and Henry VIII's theology and other impulses, some of them not theological. At that same All Saints Chapel, there was a lady, black lady, unknown to Watson and the other members who started our church, and she was doing a glossolalia, speaking in tongues. And the majority, wasn't more than the people here, asked Sherman's troops to please hush her so that they could do service the way they wanted to. So the Litchfield people, particularly the names I read off before you, Smalls and Browns and Judge, they were used to the Episcopal form of worship. We have some other testimony from people. Philander Chase, a Midwestern bishop, came and visited with Bishop Davis and came to All Saints, and there was nobody there but black enslaved people worshiping, and Father Glennie officiating, and Bishop Davis officiating. The planters were off in Charleston because they got to Charleston. As Liza Lucas Pinckney noted in a note to Reed, this place is heaven in spring, hell in summer, and a hospital in the fall. And they happened to be there during the hell period, and everyone got out except the enslaved people who had stuff to do, like running the plantations. Philander Chase said, I noticed that everybody has memorized the service. Everybody. I wish my people in Illinois knew the service the way his work, Negroes know the service. And Father Glennie modestly took credit for teaching them and said they might have pretty good memories. But they did take the service seriously. Furthermore, we have some testimony from Father Glennie, and it's funny what we racists do. We reveal truth even when we don't particularly mean to. So Father Glennie is trying to point out that black people aren't really all that bright. And he says, it's just amazing. Often I want to get the service through quicker, and I'll try to leave stuff out, and they stop me, and they won't let me. And if I forget the words, they say the words. It's just amazing what all they can imitate. But I go along with it, and that was good of him, as white people like that, to go along with things.
Wonder how he feels about the latest Supreme Court justice.
I doubt he's pleased, but I am. Now some unhappy part of the story. Not that slavery was a piece of cake. Who will get to worship where? No white people are at All Saints for a couple of years, so can't the black people who, in the physical sense, literally built the thing and have been worshiping there, can't they go? And also this handsome Prince Frederick Chapel over in, what is that place? Plantation. Can't we go there? There's no white people around. Can't we go there? There was an ordained priest, Benjamin Austin. He's from that family, and he is a brigadier general in the Confederate Army, so he's got the bona fides. He's there at Prince Frederick, and he, agreeing with Bishop Davis, agreed that, you know, the Methodists are segregating now. They're making African Methodist Episcopal Church and sending the black people over to AME churches, and the Baptists are making a black Baptist church and sending the black Baptists over to black Baptist churches, and the Presbyterians are sending people over to black Presbyterian churches. The Catholics won't do that because Catholics don't do that. Okay? We Episcopalians, remember, we're always sort of Catholic. We can't be having a black and a white church. We are a church. So, Father Austin will have to have communion, the Eucharist, for the free people who show up there and anybody else who shows up there. But we have sometimes tension between the bishop, the priest, and the lay people. And the lay people made it very clear that they did not want to do communion with ends. Although they had done that. And one thing I have learned as a student of Southern history, we often blame things on the rednecks and the lintheads with whom I grew up and worked with and know well. But sometimes it's the elite. Sometimes it's the Westons and the Hopkins and the Austins who do dumb things. Sometimes it's the 1% who do dumb things. Then we blame it on Mr. Green Jeans, but it's really not. Y'all remember him? See, I know my audience. I know you.
I'm glad Emma Rose isn't here.
The black people had no chapel to go worship at, despite the specific order of the bishop, and despite Father Glennie and Father Austin and 20 ordained Episcopal priests who told their congregations, there's one church, you will see Negroes coming in here to worship. And they said no. And so, sometime between 1867 and 1892, the congregations were successful. Majority rule, despite what looks like an Episcopal form of worship where majority doesn't rule. And there was no place where black people could go in and worship with white people. So what they did was to build new churches. John Sands, who has kept track of everything, has found pictures. They're often flimsy. There's no fewer than 5 buildings that were put up, and black people worship there. The bishop would find some priests to come a couple of times a year to offer Eucharist and to baptize and to confirm. And most of that is written down, and we can find it, can't we, Carol? And yes, sir.
We don't have any evidence, though, of any clergy at any other Episcopal churches serving these African American churches during that time. It was always folks coming down from the north and that kind of stuff. So
Bishop Davis, the liberal, is bringing in people from out of the South.
Exactly.
And they can't come every week. That's important note. there's a little more to the story, and I counseled with Father Ryan how to tell it without getting mad, and he tells me, you're a professional, you don't have to get mad. But we have, fine furniture, and we have silverware and valuable things, often crafted by enslaved people, and that's part of our worship service, and we expect it to be part of our worship service. White people came and took that away. They stripped the former slave chapels and have it today. See, I got through and was professional and cool, and that's something that happened. You don't really need that to have communion. You don't really need that to have communion. It's more fun to have it. It's more fun to have it. In 1892, we got another Book of Common Prayer, a little easier to manage. Print spread out nicely instead of double columns. Still Jacobean language, because that's what everyone did then. Talking about the 1%, that whole prayer book was financed by J. Pierpont Morgan, the original, Robin Bland, creator of How to Really Do Modern Banking, but he did pay for a very fine, beautiful edition rendered in Philadelphia of the prayer book, and that made its way here. And our families gathered and used these prayer books and used these Bibles, and on an occasion saw an ordained priest who could come in to give them some, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, burial. These different buildings that John Sands has gotten pictures of, several burned. One he thinks just collapsed. It just was a little flimsy and just collapsed. The Bishop Albert Thomas, who has a history of the diocese, notes the damage done to St. Mary's that was built by hand, by black hands, and some black people could worship there, though all the things you use in worship were taken away. And Bishop Thomas writes about this, looking back some 40 years, that it was a shame that the Negro people lost the things they would use in their service. And he went ahead and said, of course, it wasn't lost, it was taken from them. That chapel too fell into disrepair, beyond what they could do to fix it. And this is a little bit like teaching in coastal.
Sorry, John.
That's right.
I assume everybody's leaving has something to go do. I don't think it's you. I think they're all ushers and greeters.
We've done some other research on other schools that were built. The Rosenwald Foundation gave money. This is the Sears people gave money. And if you go over to Burgess, you'll see Burgess Community Center, and that was one of the so-called Sears schools. And that was also going on. They are different from the parochial schools, because the parochial schools followed W.E.B. Du Bois, who was then very, very Christian and very Hegelian Christian, and the Sears schools followed a more practical approach. We have found that Dudley Randall, who was librarian and poet at Wayne State University, knew and dealt with as a colleague one of our graduates from this Holy Cross Faith Memorial Parochial School. And he says something here about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois that will help you understand the difference in the kind of education that was happening where there's a footprint of a building there, and over at Waverly, and back over toward where the street says Yale. Booker T and W.E.B. It seems to me, said Booker T, it shows a mighty lot of cheek to study chemistry and Greek when Mr. Charlie needs a hand to hoe the cotton on his land. And Miss Ann looks for a cook who stick your nose inside a book. I don't agree, said W.E.B. If I should have the drive to seek knowledge of chemistry or Greek, I'll do it. Charles and Miss can look another place for hand or cook. Some men rejoice in skill of hand, and some in cultivating land, but there are others who maintain the right to cultivate the brain. It seems to me, said Booker T, that all you folks have missed the boat, who shout about the right to vote, and spend vain days and sleepless nights in uproar over civil rights. But keep your mouths shut, do not grouse, but work and save and buy a house. I don't agree, said W.E.B., for what can property avail if dignity and justice fail? Unless you help to make the laws, they'll send your house with trumped-up claws. A rope's as tight, a fire is hot, no matter how much cash you've got. Speak soft and try your little plan, but as for me, I'll be a man. It seems to me, said Booker T, I don't agree, said W.E.B. And our talk about the rope being tight, of course, is not metaphorical. The beautiful oak that we look at behind the altar is, of course, a hanging tree, as there were many here. And things are when the building was rebuilt, it was deliberately oriented so that you would see the crucifixion that had happened behind our altar. In Bishop Davis, who is something of a hero in all these stories, he was very frail and ill, and at a certain point he ran into A. Tuma Porter, a fascinating fellow who built a sort of industrial education school in Charleston, and had the Holy Communion Church, and went all over the North raising money to help with black education and help with black churches in Charleston. A. Tuma Porter, who has a beautiful memoir called Led on Step by Step that we read under Father Will's guidance. He ran into Bishop Davis, and Bishop Davis said, I'm a dying bishop in a dying diocese. And he was talking not only of the, so hard for the black people he was supporting to find a physical place to do their worship, and so hard to find somebody to come and lead the worship, but also the white Episcopal Church was dying in the diocese at the time that Bishop Davis said that. In one of the last conventions that we had in Charleston, Bishop Davis was nonplussed when the delegates refused to let black delegates attend and would not let the Yankee priest who had been giving them communion come in. And then Davis, that final act before death, was able to integrate the conference despite the screaming objections carried forward in the News and Courier from the majority of the priests and the majority of the lay Episcopalians. After Bishop Davis died in 1871, we have Bishop Howe, William Bell White Howe, born in New Hampshire, and an upright, another hero. He was determined that the Episcopal Church was not going to have a black Episcopal Church and a white Episcopal Church, but was going to be the church. And all things would be integrated, including the next convention that he held, and that the services throughout the diocese would be integrated. He found some 20 priests who agreed with him, and over a period of time, until 1894, he lost that battle. The conferences in the 1880s were strictly segregated, and black people met in black churches, and What finally was worked out was that North Carolina had a black Archbishop, Dulaney, who was asked if he could come and supervise certain things happening for black people in South Carolina at the churches. And of course he had, Eastern North Carolina is just massive. And we seem small, but if you drive from Lawrence to Long, you realize, Lord, it's a long drive. You know, so he would come down in these two far-flung regions of the Carolinas and try to see that black worship could be conducted. However, North Carolina has racists too, and as we came into the 20th century, they decided this guy's dying, so we'll let him die and we won't replace him. That we don't, you know, South Carolina can figure out what to do with its Negroes. We know what we'll do with our Negroes, which is nothing. In 1900, I believe 1904, we get Benjamin Martin, an ordained black man, and his wife Viola, and they arrange to preach and teach together and do so approximately 20 years. And we have a few records on them. We have, through our hardworking priests, we have discovered a descendant, an attorney, Richard Martin, who has agreed to be interviewed. So Marsh, you'll be taking his picture while he tells us and fills in a story that right now I can't tell you, except there was a black man, ordained, and his wife, educated, who taught and preached for 20 years, right here, well, actually over there in the footprint, in that space.
And his son went on to be a bishop of New York?
I think so.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Long Island. Yeah.
Long Island? Yeah.
Assistant bishop in the Diocese of Long Island. Yep.
Yeah. And then the son of that bishop is the fellow that we're talking about, and he attends St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, North Park Beach. So.
And we'll find out more from him, and Marsh will record it for us.
He was, if I may, Jack, he was astounded because he came to this church for a vestry training session that the diocese put on, and he walked in and saw the tapestry, and it's always strange, I guess, when you see your own name, you know, on a tapestry, right, and all this, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's my grandfather." And I said, "Wow, please don't go quick when you want to talk to you." So,
that was a moment. What?
yeah, it was, yeah.
It's better than talking about Carolina basketball.
Yeah. Why you gotta bring it up?
We also, besides having Ben and Viola Martin teaching and preaching, there's a fascinating person whose name is given here, Erasmus Baskerville. And he was, I guess, the first black person to hold such a title as archdeacon. They had a little trouble figuring out what to call him, because again, you've got liberal bishops, but unliberal clergy and congregants who don't like to have some kind of super duper title for a black man. So they came up with archdeacon. He was put in charge of something around 20 parochial Episcopal schools. If I forgot to mention it, of course, there's no way that white people in South Carolina were going to tax themselves to pay to have schools. That's why Mr. Rosenwald was giving money to locals to build schools for black people, and why the Episcopal Church is setting up church schools to educate people, because white people wanted black people uneducated. Erasmus Baskerville focused on we have an interesting dissertation that was done actually at Canterbury under the Archbishop, rather than under some kind of more traditional doctorate program at Cambridge or Oxford. Baskerville not only tried to make sure everyone understood the 1892 prayer book and understood what did all these different sacraments mean, but also understood, remember, justice, peace, dignity, which we will be repeating pretty soon. He also was very worried that there were unsafe and unhealthy practices. So he spent a lot of time very, very practical advice to the people gathered at Annieville, Georgiaville, and Parkersville about how to dig wells where the water would be safe, and how to prepare food so that it would be safe, and how to, we had Dr. Henry Norris, you know Norris over on Litchfield, that's Dr. Henry Norris. He did a lot of work with the free people in helping them with medical needs. But Baskerville, much like here, was in charge of getting food to people, getting health care to people, making sure they were healthy, and also making sure they were educated. And he did that for 20 different church communities spread out through the low country. In 1928, we got, check John's list, I may be giving you, 1926, we get Reverend William E. Forsyth, Father Forsyth. And Father Forsyth was dedicated strictly to this area, to this here. And we have, of course, we have Holy Cross, and we have Faith Memorial. We have some other churches. We've got the cross from Holy Cross. We were able to get that, and it's on display in our narthex. There's also lots of other crosses on display that are well worth looking at, but the one from Holy Cross is on display in there. Father Forsyth married Ruby, Miss Ruby, and we have her little banner there. Miss Ruby grew up in Charleston and regarded this as, you know, a bunch of backwoods hicks, which is a pretty good way to describe us, and came with that good Charleston sense of, you know, I'm bringing civilization to the jackasses in the backwoods, and she did that well. Ms. Ruby and Father Forsyth divided the kids up according to age. She took the younger ones, he took the older ones, and prepared them up through the 6th grade, which is about as far as anybody, white or black guy, and then tried to arrange for them to get somewhere else. Eventually it would be R.F. Howard School, and then from there to get to Voorhees, which was the university sponsored by this church for black people. We know a lot about Miss Ruby. We know that she brooked no fools, especially among the children. The girls had to wear dresses. That was partly because it was proper, but it was also because for discipline. If you screwed up part of your litany, because you're learning not only reading, writing, arithmetic, you're learning the morning prayer service. If you screw it up, she would pop you with a switch. And of course, a switch popped on bare legs is felt much more than a switch popped on blue jeans. The people eventually ran into Archer Middleton Huntington, who had bought up the old plantations and established a duck hunter's paradise, and had his wife, Anna Hyatt, building statues, which you can go see where she built at Huntington Beach State Park today.
The fighting stallions were done by her in 1950, thought to be the world's largest cast aluminum sculpture.
I think that's what she did come in and attend, and she attended graduation and then went home and died. So she really was a career of service. In 1954, the Brown family, which now we're starting to talk about people you'll see in church, Roddy, Colbert, Nathan, who used to be with us, Ms. Johanna, they pulled together money and were able to build a cinder block parish place to worship It was originally farther over on Kings Highway, and they had to move the thing because Kings Highway needed to come through. Unlike other black churches, because these people sort of knew how to talk to the right people, they were able to move. If you've seen buildings move, this is a cinder block building. And I wish I'd seen that being moved, because that's complicated. But they got the building moved over there, and probably 24 or more people continued to meet there as their children continued to study here. In 1984, Tony Campbell came here to establish Camp Baskerville. They built a swimming pool. One of the other things planters didn't want was for black people to learn how to swim, because they might get off at the plantation swimming. And so black kids were drowning and had no idea how to swim. So this church taught black people how to swim. I noticed in our interviewing that among our surviving black parishioners, there's still a anchor that we filled in the swimming pool for perfectly good reasons. It's a great liability to have a swimming pool if you don't have really well-trained lifeguards, but they see that as yet another thing that was for them that's gone. Also, of course, we got rid of the church van, and surviving black members see that as, yeah, that's like y'all, to take away our van, as if all of us have Lexuses to drive around in. And we do, I think, have to address this as members of the church. Are we taking away too many things without really thinking about it? Always thinking, as we have to, about how to balance the budget when budgets are tight. In 1989, Hurricane Hugo hit, as you will recall, and this place was selected as one of the points of light because the black people here set up places to get coffee and donuts and bandages and things like that for the rather well-to-do people who were over there on the beach who got clobbered. And George Bush, the senior, was impressed with their work. I've just about blown it, but remember that we have other people excluded. These other people were gay people who were excluded. And Father Tommy Tipton, who was always referred to by Ms. Dodd as the big one, as she refers to Father Will as the cute one, which is appropriate. Father Tipton came and talked to the Brown family and the others, Smalls, who were here, and he said, we're about to have all the people who are liberal at all kicked out of All Saints Church, and they'll probably come here. But if they do, this will become a white church. And every one of those people said, let's do it. We're not going to discriminate. There's just one church. It's not a black church, it's one church. And that's how we came to be integrated as we are. We're fortunate to have y'all joining us, and there's much more to this church, and someday you'll have to read what I write.
Are you writing a book?
I am, and it'll be the last one I write, and I don't know if I'll finish, but whatever I get finished, I'm turning over to Rita's goddaughter to make sure that the neo-Confederates don't get hold of it, and then it'll be available for whatever this church wishes to do with it. It's time to get a church, but I can entertain a few questions if anyone has questions.
I just have a memory of when I first started here, we had a church picnic at the pool.
Yeah.
Early 2000.
Yeah. We also did, we were hoping to get a memorial marker out on the highway for Ms. Ruby, because everyone who attained the rank of corporal in the Confederate Army has a memorial. But that's so political and so complicated that John Sand says, let's put it on our church. And let's get the Italians to make it in color, and it'll look better than all those great things you flash back 80 miles an hour. And for that occasion, we found everybody who had studied with Ms. Ruby and invited them. Quite a number of them were school teachers who had joined a black professional sorority, and they paid for a whoop-de-doo of a celebration, and I got to carry the cross and lead everyone out here to hear the speeches.